basically I can take a name, a domain name, an IP address, if I'm looking for an email address, and essentially what it looks for relationships. So for example, if I just take a DNS name here, for example, and we're here in LA, so if I type in, for example, LA county.gov, which is the local government site for LA County. So it could just be any name, and if I right click here, you can see it gives me an example. It says, okay, what do you want to find? I want to look for domain information, or I'm interested in an IP address. So I could say, well, okay, resolve to a domain name, and you can see that it's now resolved that quite easily. And I can then say, okay, how much detail do I want to look at? So show me some more about this domain. And I can say, okay, show me any documents or information that are advertised there. I could do things like, and this is really good, this is like things like DNS information, and this is a powerful one, email addresses. So there's so many companies out there that, for example, don't want to give email addresses out, maybe for personal or private reasons. So what this does, I can actually say, okay, go ahead and show me all the email addresses for this company. So for example, if I was a spammer, I would go off and run this report, and I can then export this information. So at the moment it's going ahead, and you can see now it's actually you can see pulling up a fair amount of email addresses. So, and you can see here by the little representation that it's found quite a few hundred there, and again you can view this in a number of different ways. And then obviously all I need to do is go and export that. So as a hacker, I can obtain personal information about an individual. And you can see here we have an individual's email address, and from that I can then say, okay, what other information? So for example, I might want to find information on the person, or maybe the person's telephone number. So it looks for relationships, okay? And that's a little bit about Maltego. Now, something else I'd like to show is the ability to hide information within files. So, for example, terrorist groups, certain government agencies and such like, they may want to keep secret certain information. So, for example, here I have a JPEG file, and if I go ahead and open up this JPEG file, you can see, well, hey, you know, it's obviously not working very well. Now, to you and me, we would just assume that this is actually a corrupt file. But if I close that down, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually open up a hex editor here. Oh, I've actually got one already open. So, this is a hex editor, and just to show you, every single file has a file type. So if I go in and just open up a picture, I'll just open up a standard kind of JPEG file here, and you can see that the JPEG file, all files have a file signature. So a common JPEG has a file signature of YOYA or JFIF. So I know that this particular file is a genuine JPEG file. But if I go ahead and say, well, let's open up another file. Let's open up that strange looking file on my desktop called Andy JPEG. So we can see here that in fact Andy JPEG is not a true JPEG file. So this is what the kinds of things that a forensics investigator might do. Now this particular file is actually an encrypted file. So I've got a little tool here called TrueCrypt, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to drag this file onto TrueCrypt, and I'm going to mount it as a volume, and I can put in a password. And if I go into Windows Explorer here, you can see that actually this is not just a file, it's actually an encrypted volume within the file. So I can of course now go ahead and create a document, and I'll just call this my work. So this document is completely encrypted within that particular file. So that's the kind of thing that we're going to be showing. And the other things that this particular piece of software does, it can also hide data within volumes as well. So for example, if I go ahead and reopen that up again, it's actually here. So if I just dismount this, and here's another example of a file. I've got one called demo JPEG here. So if I go in here and actually mount this, okay, and you can see that it's actually gone ahead and mounted. That's fine. So now this is actually a virtual machine. So it's a virtual hard disk that's got an encrypted volume within an encrypted volume with an encrypted volume. So this is undetectable. So no forensics tool in the world would be able to detect that because it's encrypted 3 times. So that's the kind of technology that some bad guys and also some governments are using in order to hide their data.
On the first type of file that you had there, you obviously can detect it with the hex editor, but obviously people aren't going to go and open the hex editor with all their files.
Of course.
So how can you, is there any way you can scan or broadly detect these types of hidden files in your environment?
There are I don't want to obviously mention them today, but there are certain tools that, for example, the FBI and law enforcement agencies have to detect these types of files. But once you start encrypting within files and again within and again within again, and also virtual machines, this becomes very, very difficult to manage. So how do we stop products like this? Well, for example, in a corporate environment, we have new features, for example, in Windows 7, software restriction policies that would be able to restrict this type of application running on an end user's machine. So for example, as a network administrator, this is the kind of thing I would probably go ahead and stop. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Andy, for your time. Really appreciate it.
No problem. Absolute pleasure.
And I'm sure we'll see you, in future tech heads, right?
I hope so.
Right.
Yeah,
on.
definitely.
All right.
Cool.
Thanks.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.